That you didn't have to leave?
I wish I didn't have to leave.
Oh, well, what is that big tractor trailer in front of your house?
That was my stuff.
That's your stuff?
Yeah, I left this morning.
Get out of town. That truck is gone now? Huh? Wow. Wow. Teeny, how are ya? How's Wyoming? There's more cows than people in the state of Wyoming.
Barren and cold.
Antelope.
-12 when I left.
How you doing?
Good to see you. And you're not lying about
Joey,
that.
Joey,
There's
Joey.
antelopes. More
And
antelope
antelopes.
than.
So you ready to go, huh? Yeah.
Don't want to. But. That's pizza, Joe.
Not bad. The thin crust.
You know, my
Nope.
family wanted to have a little going with some aunts and uncles. And we went to.
Plenty of pizza. Pizza per person.
Busy. Bet your business is going pretty well right now. Especially trying to finish my hours.
Crust,
I'm under 300 left.
counts and how.
About 280 hours left of internship. Really? I just sit for the license.
Finally get paid.
You don't even remind me.
Tina, are you the chair?
Roseanne.
Roseanne. Oh, you're the new chair. Oh, good. Okay, Roseanne, take over.
Okay.
No, wait, I'm kidding. Wait till everyone comes in.
Okay. I'm gonna leave.
George is coming.
I was gonna wait till you took a bite. And then
Oh, yeah. This is great. I didn't even get a fork.
Oh, good. We'll get my paperwork anyways.
You sure?
What have you been up to, old man?
The worst thing is when we hired Julio,
Getting older.
he convinced us.
I celebrated my mother's 94th birthday
Settlement.
Oh, wow.
Sunday.
And I truly believe he
Yeah,
But it's as good as mine was.
Okay.
That's
and
awesome.
it just reminds me
Okay,
of
thank you. That'll be later.
not a young kid anymore myself.
When she was
counsel and I was him to
Jim was born in the Great Depression.
My little snacks got picked up.
He was a depression baby.
Depression baby.
$1,000 an hour law firm, but we were convinced it'd be worth it, and he never did.
And then
So we really lost those cases.
getting ready for a marathon. I ran
You're running a marathon?
But water under the bridge and
the Morgan Hill one.
Full marathon?
Oh, really? That's a nice
Yeah,
area.
I did
Oh, my
San
God.
Juan Bautista half
Good for you.
You know how I thought it was.
last month.
Well, it's weird because it's like one set of shadings, the old side,
Yeah.
has the other side.
It was awful.
Everything's brand new.
In good health.
Good for you.
Yeah, I'm on my dad's side.
Needed
I mean,
good
everybody-
resources.
All the males seem to die young.
Is Jennifer Yamaguma coming?
Yeah.
She's in Napa.
I know, but you still
where?
gotta get your heart checked.
Napa?
Yeah. I think
Nice.
Simrock should be.
Everybody thinks, well,
I had to
but I'm
flew out of
exercising
the
and I'm eating
office
good.
on Friday.
if it's hereditary,
6:30
Doesn't
at
matter.
night. She's still here. Angie, Jennifer.
Yeah.
I had a friend,
Kind
his
of
brother
make her
ran
go home.
ultra
She's been working
marathons.
at 3 in the morning
Okay, so
to get the stuff online for the
Pretty fit.
council district peak democracy.
dropped
and all
dead in
that.
front of a fire
And
station.
I
Luckily,
sat
they
there. I had my whole
revived him.
family with us.
So that's
Because
why
we were
for
just
me
going
was
to pick up some stuff.
I was
And
hot
we
when I was
sat
having
in
a
her
hard time
office
breathing. I'm
until
like,
she finished. We had like a protest.
I went and got my heart checked, I had a nuclear test, and
Oh, that's too
everything was great, but
But she's, the
Be
good thing is
scary.
she's taking
Oh,
some
yeah.
photos with
Oh,
us.
good.
Yeah.
brothers
And
I'd
then you
never
get to
met.
be a certain age and you realize
I've
it's
done
like,
her.
They're friends of Eddie and Debbie's.
Oh,
I'll find out. Let me find out
Practice the
who's
heart.
here for her.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think
I almost can't drink anymore.
She's got a cute wife.
Yeah, Pam.
Almost. I said almost.
Oh, right here.
And what
Well,
And I do.
happened was,
Oh my God.
they,
Come on.
go like hell.
And then my chest.
they
got
went
really
to,
tight.
As soon as we get a
anyways,
couple
we
more
went to
council
the
members.
one at
That's what mine
SDS.
does. How are they?
And he goes, part of that
Not
was
worth it.
frozen.
No.
Let me go get him.
It had no flavor.
We're getting
You can
food.
tell.
Oh, okay.
Sad part, my wife and I are both at that stage where we order one meal and share it. And but you never want to be at this point.
Sounds good.
Saturday? Yes. No, a couple weeks ago.
It took all day Sunday to recover from all the food.
Then I went to one in Sunnyvale out.
Otherwise,
I'm blessed.
A lot.
It was a lot.
Weeks ago.
yeah.
You sit there and you eat for like 4 hours.
Fun.
So many courses, and they always do that.
Hello,
Cream
sir.
puffs at the end. It's like,
How you doing?
just when you think you're
I'm
done,
all right.
another bite.
I'm
There it
actually
is, right in front of
thinking
you.
about doing a
Bittersweet.
This is getting Brian and Teresa.
senior amateur fight. Boxing.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
What's the other one?
They put the pads all over your head first?
Oh, yeah.
Say hi to Terry.
I've been sparring lately with the pro.
How about your house?
I mean,
Grab home for my daughter.
if he wanted to kill me, he'd kill me. Hey, Pat, how are you, boss? Good to see you.
Yeah, shop.
Young man, how are you?
Everything's under control. Oh, did you?
It is.
I got that pneumonia, I didn't want that stuff back. I usually don't get it.
Winter
I
break.
check your hand, but I got pizza on
No.
They do this, like marinate it with melted
But,
butter and all those herbs.
I never used to do it.
And serve it cold.
And then,
You know, it was something that
we had to take care of my
I
mom.
drove by the studio, it's on Scott.
They required us.
One more.
He said, I wonder if it's art of boxing.
So then,
I was curious, I went in and looked,
I
I'm
used to
like,
keep it for over here.
no, and I needed to start. Thinking, you know,
I'm giving you time to put your food in.
and then I said, hey, you know, I don't want.
I really like the salad.
Isn't the salad really good?
Well, you know, you start getting the mix.
Yeah.
and then
Really
you realize,
good.
Everybody has learned maths and everything.
I know, I
I want to
didn't
do
know
something, I
that.
want to do something with it.
I take care of
quick.
Yeah, I didn't know.
So now it's
And
just,
nobody told me.
it's just a lot of
know, but-
sparring and, you know, the headgear and everything. I still don't like getting hit in the head too hard. I don't like getting hit on the side. I don't mind
All right,
getting
here
hit
comes Teresa.
because I can almost see it coming,
She's walk up.
you know, but sometimes you'll be down here and you drop that arm and all of a sudden he's like,
No.
keep your hand up.
Wow.
When you feel like your head.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to call this joint City Council Parks and Recreation Commission meeting to order. I see that we have a quorum here, so we're confirming the quorum. And so welcome, Parks and Recreation Commission. Has it been a year already since we last saw you?
A little over.
A little over a year. Okay. So should we start by going around the room and everyone introducing themselves? Could we start with this gentleman?
Chucky.
Recognized in the corner here.
Chuck Blair.
Joe Martinez.
Roseanne LaCruzier.
Andrew Knapp.
Gino Solo, Mike Walkie.
Jim Teixeira.
Brian Doyle.
Deanna Santana.
Pat Mahan?
Teresa O'Neill.
Lisa Gilmore.
Debbie Davis.
Pat Colstead.
Thank you. We're, two council members aren't here this evening, so this is the extent of what we have today. So welcome. Roseanne, you're the chair of the Parks and Recreation Commission. Congratulations. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what's going on in the commission?
Sure, well, I'm gonna start with,
And you can speak, Roseanne, into this microphone.
oh my God, I can't even reach it.
Thank you, if that's okay. When everyone speaks, if they just grab the closest one to them.
Can you hear me?
It'll pick up your voice good.
I'm loud. I mean, this is kind of our 2017 status report. The Parks and Rec Commission had 4 work plan goals set at the last council commission dinner meeting on January 10th of 2017. To conduct a facility condition and needs assessment is number 1. Number 2, to update the city park rules and signs. Number 3, to improve parks and athletic field public access, supervision and enforcement of rules. And number 4, to enhance citywide special events by having a local emphasis, added activities, and cultural commission collaboration. Does anybody have any questions?
What was number 3 again? The third one?
The third one was to improve parks and athletic fields public access, supervision and enforcement of rules, and to enhance the citywide special events by having a local emphasis, added activities, and cultural commission I can't get it out. Collaboration. Facility condition and needs assessment. In April of 2017, the City of Santa Clara selected Kitchell CEM to perform facility condition assessments for all Parks and Rec Department facilities, including 49 parks and 65 buildings located within the City of Santa Clara. The purpose of this assessment was to inventory all the parks and recreation assets and input the data into the city's enterprise asset management system and geographic information system. assess the conditions and identify current deficiencies of all of our assets, benches, pathways, fountains, buildings, etc. Determine the cost of repair and/or replacement of those deficiencies. Forecast anticipated future necessity, renewals and costs for site systems over a 20-year life cycle. Assist the city in preventative maintenance planning and work orders. And use the information of the department's capital improvement project, CIP budget planning. The Park and Recreation Commission received a project update at the January meeting, and the final report is expected to go to the council, in March. Park rules and regulations, ordinances, and signs. In February of 2017, the commission formed a subcommittee. Chuck Blair, oh my God.
Andrew.
Who are you?
Got a name tag.
And Tino
Don't
Silva.
take it personal.
Please don't, please don't, I'm losing my mind here. Let's see, where are we? To meet with staff and assist with the review of park rules, including tennis and picnic areas. The commission discussed and recommended new rules for the community tennis courts in June and changes to the rules for parks in January. Staff will be bringing forward a report and proposed ordinance to amend the park use rules proportions of the city code. It is hoped that the new rules would be implemented in the new fiscal year. Parks and athletic fields access, supervision, and enforcement. The commission continues to discuss ways to provide enforcement of rules and proper use of parks, picnic areas, and athletic fields. The commission encourages park users and user groups to use parks properly and safely and to take care of the public's property for the benefit of all residents. The commission encourages collaboration among departments, particularly with the Santa Clara Police Department. The new rules will be needed to be enforced. Special event enhancement, local focus, and activities of cultural commission collaboration. The commission met with members of the Cultural Commission and discussed collaboration of the events. The commission focused on enhancing the annual holiday tree lighting event, the Art and Wine Festival with the Cultural Arts Commission booth. 5 mini events called Central Park Nights were held during the ice rink season, resulting in new visitors to the rink each week and free community entertainment. A local brewer was added to the Art and Wine Festival. The Cultural Committee hosted their summer concerts in Central Park, and the Parks Division assisted with the setup and takedown for the street dance. Commission information and special presentations. In addition to the 4 work plan goals, the Parks and Recreation Commission continued its regular monthly activities, including professional development on subject matter within the commission purview. The commission hosted PlayCorps Center for Professional Development, which presented the 7 principles of inclusive playground design that addresses the developmental needs of the whole child: physical, communicative, social, emotional, and sensory development. The commission adopted these principles as a best practice for Santa Clara's parks rehabilitation and development. Commission projects reviews. The Parks and Recreation Commission continued to review and listen to public comment on new park projects and rehabilitation of existing parks at its regular meetings and department community outreach programs and meetings. These included Steve Carley Rehabilitation Project completed in June of 2017. The project included a new playground, benches, basketball court, and surface, picnic, and barbecue area. The project received Play On certification from PlayCorps for the implementation of universal playground design and keeping the natural shade. San Tomas Monroe Community Garden and Neighborhood Park groundbreaking was held September 2017. Lawrence Station Area Plan, Parks, and Summerhill Homes. The commission asked Summerhill Homes to incorporate research based on practices that support the city's parks and recreation system-wide goals of health and fitness for the entire community through inclusionary, sustainable, age-friendly designs which integrate and support our natural park habitats. Specifically, the commission encouraged the developer to use reference materials and best practices that support the commission's focus on play, promoting physical activity for children and adults that includes balancing, oh my God, what is this word? Thank you. Upper body activities, climbing, swinging, sliding, spinning, running, free play, imagination. Inclusion, implementing the 7 principles of inclusive playground design and age-friendly principles. Developmental domains, social, emotional, physical, sensory, thank you, cognitive, and communication, and substantially to make sure parks remain the integral part of the city's natural ecosystem. Park rehabilitation projects. The commission worked with the department to launch robust public outreach for park and rehabilitation projects for Bowers, Machado, Montague, Agnew, Fuller Street, and Home Ridge Parks. So far, the schematic designs have been approved for Bowers and Machado Parks, and construction and documents are being prepared. The other parks are finishing up the public input phase. Art and Wine Festival. The commission developed new community grant guidelines for the nonprofit funded by the Art and Wine Festival. The commission recommended council approval of $89,000 of festival proceeds for Santa Clara-based nonprofits. The commission worked on all aspects of the festival, including selection of bands on main stage, wine, beer, and commemorative glass selections, and the marketing poster image. Park names. The Parks and Rec Commission recommended council consideration of naming the future community center building at the Reed and Grant Street Sports Park, Jerry Marcelli Community Center, and naming the future maintenance building at the Reed and Grant Street Sports Park, Reed Street Maintenance Building. Community Recreation and Aquatic Center Project. The commission continues to track and attend community meetings related to funding and feasibility for a new Central Park Community Recreation and Aquatic Center. Commissioner comments? Does anybody have anything that they'd like to add? As you can see, the Parks and Recreation Commission has had a busy and active year. My fellow commissioners may have other points of view to add to this. Anybody?
So actually, George Guerra had a family emergency, so he couldn't attend.
Okay.
He texted me, and sorry, I forgot to let you know.
I hope everything's okay.
Yeah, I think it'll be fine. So, I mean, I'll go, because there's a couple things on here that I think are stuff that we've talked about a lot, and we seem to talk about it a lot after an event, or we seem to talk about it a lot after something goes on in a park, and you know, that is, you know, Commissioner Blair and Knack and I worked on these park ordinances, if you will, kind of rules and regulations, the do's and don'ts, what you can and can't do. And these aren't going to mean anything unless they're enforced. So, you know, we can come up with rules and regulations and ordinances until the cows come home, but the truth is if we don't police our parks, if we don't have a way of enforcing these rules, then quite frankly, they're not worth the paper they're written on. And, you know, I know that we have an ordinance for the parks for a major event where it says, I don't know, maybe it's not an ordinance, but it was brought up in our meeting where there's no dogs allowed. And yet, I feel like I'm the one who's telling people, you know, you can't have your dog in the park during the Art and Wine Festival because, you know, it's really a matter of safety. I mean, some of these dogs are pretty big. We have just this much room for that much people. And when you put a dog in there in a leash, you know, it's just a recipe for somebody falling over and hurting themselves. And so I'm not putting the onus on the PD. I'm not putting the onus on any one particular group. But I do think as our city expands, we're going to have to preserve our parks. So for instance, if you have a group of 50 or more and they're out there tearing up the grass on Saturday morning, The consequence is the kids that use that field for the next 10 to 15 weeks are playing on mud because nobody's going out there saying, you have to have a permit in order to use this. There was countless times, Chuck, myself, when I was president of youth soccer my first time around, I would go out and kick people off of Curtis because we spent almost $100,000 to fix it. And in one weekend, it can be ruined. So I would really encourage council and the city manager to think seriously about how we can take these rules and ordinances and the work that we've done and find a way or a mechanism to enforce them. We've talked about a number of different ways of doing it. And so I don't think we're married to any one way, but I would hate to see the work that we did on this and the amount of time and effort that the parks and staff have put into this, to see it just basically be nothing more than a bunch of words on paper. So for me, that's really one of my big issues, if you will, with the Parks Department. So again, there's numerous ways we can do it. Part of the problem is that the PD didn't have a formal ordinance to enforce. So you can't ask them to enforce something that doesn't exist. So, I mean, we're well aware of the fact that, you know, there's limits as to what they can do. But I think this is going to give us the necessary framework and groundwork for you guys to put this into motion and then back it up with some upkeep, if you will. And I really think that it's not a matter of, you know, it's going to take months and years. I think it's a matter of people are going to figure out pretty quick that the city's going to enforce its ordinances. You're going to have a group that you kick out once. When an officer goes out there and says, if you come back, there'll be consequences, they're not going to want to come back. They're going to realize that we mean business. And we haven't for a long time. So.
Have you proposed those ordinances? Sorry, Pat.
Oh, no, go ahead, that's kind of.
We actually brought them to I think it was last meeting.
Okay, so they're coming soon?
So I believe you guys are going to be getting them soon.
Right.
Probably the next month or two. And, you know, where this really is an issue, to be honest, is it's during the rainy season. Because our soil in Santa Clara is very, very, very hard to fix. Once it turns to mud, it takes a whole season for it to regenerate. And it takes tens of thousands of dollars from nonprofit organizations to do the work in conjunction with the school district to get those fields up to an acceptable level, right? So there's been, I think, since I've been president, we've spent well over $120,000, $130,000 on fixing public fields. We also spent $80,000 on renting a facility from King's Academy so a certain age group, which our younger age group, could actually play on a suitable field because teams that were coming to play in Santa Clara would not play their games because the fields weren't adequate. There has to be a certain standard, and that standard wasn't met, so we ended up spending $80,000 to rent a facility in order for those folks to play those games.
Another big problem that away from the athletic side is, you know, the rules we've put forth with the parks. With they're not supposed to be jumpy houses. There's jumpy houses. Alcohol, it's only supposed to be at certain parks. Every park has it. And Saturday, during my moving process, I came around the corner at Henry Schmidt, which I live alongside, and there was a big jumpy house, and they had a full-on bar set up. And it was right there on Saratoga, and I'm thinking, God, it's too bad, you know, someone doesn't stop and do nothing about it. But we were talking is maybe something as simple as having a park ranger. Maybe you could do it through the community service people with the police department or something. Just someone that could write a citation to these people in those situations that are violating the alcohol rules or violating where they could put a jumpy house at or where they could do these certain things. Because once the word gets out that it's going to happen, people are going to stop taking advantage of it. And it's not fair to, you know, just a nice family wants to go out and enjoy the deal and use the city barbecue that's there and everything else when these guys come rolling in with commercial barbecues and all this other stuff and push everybody out of the way. And, you know, it's meant for everybody in the city to enjoy. And so if we could get some way to monitor, I understand the PD has a problem with it for whatever it is. If it's, I don't know if it's beneath them or what. But if we could just get someone maybe in a sense of just handle that, especially on the weekends, could go by those parks and could write a citation, that'd be great.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm curious to know what kind of enforcement, and I wish Tina were still here, and ordinances you have in mind. You know, one of the things we keep saying on the council, as our city gets denser and these large developments go up, we like to make sure that there are neighborhood parks so that people can go out and do the very things you're talking about. Have a birthday party with a jumping house at a park, because they're not going to be able to do it at their condo or their apartment, or have a barbecue, and if it means bringing their own barbecue pit, as long as it's safe. Because, again, they're not going to be able to do it in their apartment, and they need that open space. So we're looking at our parks even accommodating more family-type activities. So I'm curious to know what kinds of ordinances and enforcement you're even talking about.
Well, I think it's pretty much, each park in its own way had special ways of splitting up the space and everything, because the big problem was with jumpy houses, and we came up with ideas of maybe putting concrete slabs down that they could go and rent through the parks, and then it'd have everything there, so it'd be safety wise. We could put those in certain parks, and then, you know, if you want to have a jumpy house for a party at a park, you need to go down to City Hall or go to the CRC, wherever, and get, you know, reserve a spot, and it's there for you to use.
Or maybe we should think about that for every park, because I
That's what
think our
we've done.
thoughts are for,
But some parks, we didn't think that they're just appropriate not to have them because of the way the
if we're
park's built.
thinking of using parks as outdoor space for high-density housing, we have to think about using that park in close proximity to like a development like Monticello or something, because that's what it's all about, is that neighborhood park becomes your family outside space. So I think we
Well, we did that
want to
with.
figure out how to do that
We did that with the
everywhere.
Santa Tomas Park, where they wanted to put in bocce ball courts, and where I was like,
Well,
that's,
bocce ball courts is another thing, because
said
very
it's a-
few people play.
I said, it's a great deal, but the problem is we got, you know, a lot of low-income apartments and stuff across the street, and these families could walk over here. They're probably people
Right.
are going to be taking advantage of the garden and everything else, and they want to be able to come over and have a barbecue and stuff.
Exactly.
We could put 5 more barbecue pits in and tables and stuff, and then we all say, hey, you know what? That's the way to do it. So, I mean, we are, as a group, I think we really were leaning that way
Yeah,
because of the
good.
density, and it's just like, things like jumpy houses, because of the liability and stuff, you know, certain parks that are built like this, you can't put them in, and someone's gonna get
No, but I
hurt.
think your idea of having a
Yeah.
designated space to have them and have people sign up, I don't think that the rent should be
Yeah.
enormous. It should be very minimal, and maybe just have the permit so that we know that it's used and they put it in the right place. And of course, you know what bocce ball translates to in Italian, from Italian? How to get out of the house on a Sunday afternoon.
Makes sense,
That's what my grandpa used to always do.
makes sense.
So part of what we also did was we took the existing language that existed, the existing language, and we simply kind of modified it. So for instance, tennis courts, you know, we wanted to be specific, what you can and can't do on a tennis court. We don't want soccer being played on a tennis court. We don't want skateboarders on a tennis court. We want tennis for tennis. We established hours, appropriate hours. We established whether or not, what courts you could use for, say, lessons. So we designated those. When you look at jumpy houses, what we did is we worked in conjunction with staff to identify the parks where it would be safe. Because of course, we wanted to make sure that if somebody puts a jumpy house in, say a small park, that safety and liability, which I know we're being more mindful of, was also one of the issues. So we wanted to make sure that there was adequate space. So we did talk about that. We talked about dog park stuff. I think a little bit about the dog park. I may or may not be correct on that, but it was really, you know, also, you know, ball fields, which you can and can't do on the ball field. So it was sort of taking what we had and really kind of clarifying it, making it pretty black and white, so people can look at it and go, oh, okay, this is what we can and can't do. So that's it. The other thing we looked at was parks that we could reserve, because we realized that we only have 2 parks that you can reserve. And if somebody wants to have a significant birthday party or somewhere and they don't live by Central Park, we identified some other parks that they could use, that we could permit. So that kind of helps people plan a little bit better. So the parks we felt were adequate, we went ahead and recommended that those also be permitted. We put a lot of language around we really spent a lot of language, a lot of time on these jumpy houses because we felt that those were the most, created the greatest liability for the city. We also wanted to make sure that if they were going to get a jumpy house, that they went through an approved vendor through the city. We wanted to make sure that they, had the proper insurance. We wanted to make sure that somebody was with the actual jumpy house. There was a specific location where they could do that. We also wanted to make sure we didn't want a bunch of people bringing generators into parks because that's not a great idea. So we really kind of narrowed down the jumpy houses, and I agree that people should be able to use the park in any way they want to. However, if you get 2 or 3 families with 2 or 3 jumpy houses on a small park, it's going to be chaos. And so we wanted to be able to control that aspect, and more so for safety and liability.
I agree that we have to have some kind of regulations on that. I'm sure our risk management manager would agree to that. That we don't have. We're getting soon. We're getting there. One of the things you talked about was enforcing some of the laws and the regulations of the parks. And I seem to recall that the police reserve officers were the officers that were the most present in the parks. And I don't know if that's still the case or not. Director, do you know? Well, I know that, but typically in the past, it was the police reserve that were, looking, or at least patrolling the parks to add a little bit more enforcement as opposed to staff of the Parks and Recreation Department on the weekends and things like that, nights and weekends. Are we aware of that? Maybe we can look into that as well, because that used to be something that
Yeah, we should look into that to see what the current status is. I just know that there's a priority in terms of which calls go out. And sometimes, if someone relays, we've got an incident in the park and it doesn't seem to be, there's no violence, no alcohol, no whatever. It's a lower priority. And I think with the commission on their, in the discussions that they were having, it really was, we need consistent enforcement of rules. We also, on the tennis court as well, I mean, who goes out and enforces that? We have our staff out there, but you have people who just set up businesses, use the public courts, dominate the time, and other people can't get access. And so, who would enforce that? Not necessarily the police department, but from a Parks and Rec standpoint, again, making sure that we had, approved vendors, so that we can, in one sense, co-opt certain things, so that maybe we had a list of tennis vendors, and these are the only ones that would be permitted out, and then the city would get some of that revenue. And then they would also know that they were being watched by the customers.
Well,
so
as our
vendorize some
parks
things.
are become more and more popular, as Councilmember Mahan said, the density, people are using these parks as their backyard. As that happens, I think we need to make the rules and regulations clear. They should be visible. They should be clear, and we should enforce them. And it sounds easy, but it's not. So those are the things that really have to happen. And whether, the council looks at investing more into the parks in terms of concrete areas for jumpy houses and certain parks that you can reserve for the birthday parties. I mean, I'm guilty of sitting out there at, 5 o'clock in the morning on a bench, freezing, waiting for my space for a party. I mean, that's what people are doing. So if we become a little bit more, maybe you can reserve online or something like, make it easier for the families to go and do that. I think it's important, but just to keep our parks, clean, safe. It just takes, someone out there having a big party with a full bar and a jumpy house, and is a recipe for problems and that affect other residents that are trying to use the parks as well. So I don't think we can, over enforce. We should enforce. And make the parks, safe and available for everyone, but make the rules clear, so we have something to enforce. So I look forward to getting those rules and regulations and proposed ordinances and see what we can do to make it, better for everybody.
Yeah. Well, in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a reserve officer, and I asked Sherry, because Sherry and I worked together. a while ago, 30 years ago, actually. Dan Magnan.
Officer Dan.
Officer
yeah.
Dan. He would, he would show up every night he worked as a reserve officer, he'd show up to the CRC, and he would drive through Central Park. He would drive through all the parks. And so, I think to start off is that, if we could work in conjunction with the PD, if there is a reserve officer that could be primarily in charge of park enforcement, making sure that people are jumpy houses are where they need to be and so on and so forth. I don't know that we need to have somebody 7 days a week, because typically at most parks are occupied during the weekdays by either athletic groups or whatever the case is. It's the weekends where we typically have the most issues. So we used to have a reserve officer years ago, and that was his primary duty when he wasn't on a more serious call.
Well, that's what I thought. We had quite a few going out. So, I think we should explore that as well. Nobody mentioned the swim center or anything. That's a little bit. I know it's on our agenda tonight, so we're going to be talking about some of the results that we're getting from PFAL. But I think that is an absolutely huge Parks and Recreation opportunity for with the community center and maybe other needs for the Parks Department.
We try to track and keep up with all that with the swim center.
Jim was giving us feedback back on surveys and stuff. We were waiting for a lot of that kind of stuff to see.
Yeah, so I'm saying
want.
just keep track of that, because that's a big deal. I want to thank you for all your work on the Arts and Wine Festival, because that really is the premier event in Santa Clara in terms of the community. It's just growing bigger and more special every year, which requires so much work on your part as commissioners. So thank you very much for what you do, because the community really appreciates all the effort that you put into that event, and it just keeps getting better and better. And I know it's harder and harder for all of you to maintain that level of excellence in the event.
Quick.
It just, when you finish, and so many nonprofit organizations rely on that for their funding for the year. So thank you.
We actually increased everybody's funding this year by minimal amounts, but everybody got a little bit more this year than they have in the past year.
Because we all worked that much harder selling everything. It was nonstop this
when it
year.
sells out on a Saturday and you have to regroup for Sunday, that was like incredible.
I think the tree lighting is really becoming a special event too.
Yeah.
That was my
I think
next
it's really
thing.
great community event.
Was the tree lighting was phenomenal this year. It is every year, but it's become bigger and bigger, and I think there's going to be more demands on you for the tree lighting, because more people want to get involved in some way in the ceremony, tree lighting ceremony, and the whole event with the ice skating rink and everything. It's really, really taken off. So thank you for that, and thank you for all the public outreach you're doing in terms of the improvements that we're making into rehabbing the parks. We've gotten very positive feedback that the Parks Department and the Commission is seeking, public input when it comes to the neighborhood parks, because those are the most important to the people that live in those neighborhoods. So
I also would like to take the time to thank the Parks and Rec, the people that are in charge of us and put up with us all year long. And it hasn't been easy, I'm sure, for them, but Dale, Kim, and Jim have been great.
Oh, what are you talking about, Roseanne? Look at all of you.
Go home and drink at night.
Teresa, do you have something?
One thing I will say, and this is something is, like today I was at the senior swim at the swim center. So one of the comments that I do get from people there and at some of the other places is people concerned about the maintenance of the facilities we currently have. And, last year there was almost a riot because the women's shower didn't have hot water for a number of weeks, and they were threatening, I think they did one time storm over and commandeered the men's shower room. But so what am I, and I don't know whether the commission has any input, and I know Jim has a very challenging budget, but even though we're doing all this assessment and as we're planning for the future, it does seem like for the big facilities like the swim center and some of the others to make sure that they're it's kind of hard to know how much do you invest in an existing facility when you're possibly thinking about a new one or whatever, but I do get kind of complaints from people about the condition of some.
Had that brought to us about the swim center, and what a lot of people don't understand is it's so outdated and it's so far gone that when they go to work on stuff, it's just beyond grasp trying to fix it, and that's what the problem with a lot of our parks are. I mean, they just need to be brought up to date, but to be able to maintain them, even. Some of the stuff that you don't even have replacements for what's there. So, I mean, you know, I think we're heading the right direction. I mean, I don't know if everyone understands exactly what happened with Steve Carley Park, but in all my years of being on this commission, it's one of the things I'm most proud of. And I remember when the gentleman came and talked to us about what that Go Play stuff meant, you know, and I was like, and he's explaining how a kid in a wheelchair shouldn't feel any different. So we'll just lower the rings so the little kids can play on them, but then the kid comes by in a wheelchair, he can play it too. So no one notices the difference. It's not special. They just get to do everything else that the normal kids get to do, other kids get to do. And the way this whole structure, this whole thing was set up was amazing to me and heartwarming. And then to see that, see it play out and see it go to work, it's been pretty cool. And Jim and the staff have brought a lot of that kind of stuff to our attention. And I'm excited to be able to come back and see what is going to happen with the parks, because I'm sure that, we got a lot more of that coming down the road. It's going to be neat. But to answer your question, a lot of the stuff is so old and decrepit that they're trying to figure, but it's a problem.
So tonight on our agenda, we're going to have to end this meeting soon because I have to turn the room around for the 6 o'clock meeting for the study session. But talking about the needs for the swim center, the community center, and, this may lead into something of an all-around, city park need that we may want to just expand the discussion to start talking about that. So we really want your input and your close association with all the discussions on the swim center and the community center and Central Park, and looking at our city generally as a whole and what our needs are for our parks, because the needs are just becoming greater and grander as this city develops. And we have to think in different ways, and I appreciate what the Parks Department and what your commission has done in terms of the different parks, like Steve Carley Park, which is an incredible park. Yeah, it was wonderful, the opening where they described everything that was going to happen. And that one word you couldn't pronounce, Roseanne, I didn't know what it meant. I had to look it up. So there's that, and then the Santa Moss and Monroe, community gardens. I mean, that's a new type of park. We have, the barrack site and what's going to happen over there. And I know we're thinking differently. We're trying to be a little bit more creative in what we're doing and trying to keep on, the cutting edge for Parks and Recreation. So we couldn't do it without you. So thank you again. And I know we have to cut this short. Is there anybody else that would like to make some closing comments, or Roseanne?
No, I'm fine. I just have some pamphlets to hand to each of you.
Oh, thank you.
I think you'd like this information.
Thank you. Any closing comments from commissioners?
Just one thing that I've noticed since because I live right by Steve Carley Park, the number of people that frequent the park now is infinitely higher than it was prior to us investing money into it. And the neglect of the last 30 years of not having park recovery fees as we've developed the city has brought us to where we are today. We think that the Parks Department is adequately funded. It's adequately funded to function on a day-to-day basis. But it takes more than just what this council budgets in order to maintain what we have. And as we grow this city, as we put in thousands and thousands of new dwellings, parks are really one of the only free things people can do. So as you bring tens of thousands and more people to the city, it's also your responsibility to make sure that we have enough place for those people to actually get out from these huge townhomes that they're living in. The high-density residency. You can go down and look at any park in the evening, and there's people walking around that before I used to never see. So I think you have to be in conjunction with, if you're gonna grow the city and it's gonna grow exponentially, you have to also pay attention to those services and what we consider the parks, because they're going to be utilized more and more and more.
I agree, and I think we have a lot to make up for. The parks fees are from here forward, but we have a lot of
Catching up to
deferred
do.
maintenance that we have to do. And then I just want to leave you with, you are recommending that we name the Reed Street Maintenance Building, the Reed Street Maintenance Building? Really?
We didn't really come up with anything else.
Okay, we might come up with something creative.
I think so.
The Parks Commission Maintenance Building, something like that, so. No, anyways, thank you so much. The Chuck Blair Maintenance Building, and there's a lot more pizza in there.
Thank you.
But you're welcome to stay, because the next item is regarding the Swim Center, Community Center, Hall of Fame, and everything else, so, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We have a meeting tonight?
This is it.
Well, this is our meeting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You could use it for that, because that is new, so. And Quimby can be used.
It's a